Hi, I feel honored to be the one to open the show tonight. It's been a long time, but I want to welcome you back to the Tony Woiak Lectures. It was a long 17 months ago when we gathered here on February 25th, 2020 to learn about the Houghton Depot. Settle in, I have a lot of announcements. And the reason for that long interval that we had brings about some changes. We are not serving refreshments this evening, but please do feel free to buy drinks at the bar. We have a very good rate here, and we want to give them as much support as we can so that we can continue to hold our gatherings here. Bayfield County recommends that large groups wear masks when gathering inside and maintain a distance from those outside your group. After the presentation, if you want to linger and chat, you may choose to go out on the open air patio. I forgot to look, but we were supposed to have wood stone. Yes, we have them. We have these for sale at the gate, and they're $7. It's a book that was published several years ago. It's a great book for $7 to put on your guest room bedside table because it tells an easy read about Washburn and why you live here. As you know, this festival is sponsored by the Washburn Area Historical Society and the Washburn Heritage Association. The Heritage Association has a vacancy for a new board member. So if you are interested and you live in Washburn or any of the adjoining townships, please contact a member of the Washburn Heritage Association if you are interested in working with us. We have a lot of fun. Thanks to the Apostle Islands Historic Preservation Conservancy for the grant funds that pay for this festival in the summer. And thank you to our hosts, the Harborview Event Center. Our next presentation will be during the Brownstone Community Block Party. It will be at the club, and it will be on a Saturday afternoon, so not the usual schedule. It'll be at 4:30 in the late afternoon. At that time, Joe Masson and Judge John Anderson will introduce us all to Hubert Peavy, Washburn's only representative to the U.S. Congress. I was told not to move this mic, and I have to be on my tiptoes. If you have ideas for future presentation topics, please speak to one of the sponsoring board members. Finally, it is my pleasure to ask you to relax and prepare for a short journey. Our good friends, Jan Lee and Tom Mitchell, are going to take us up home on Engoe Road.
So I would like to take a second here to invite Gary Holman up. Where is Gary Holman? Holman. Calling Holman. Yeah, everybody give Gary a nice warm welcome. He had a couple of words he wanted to say. You can be on the mic if you want. Just don't move it. Sorry about that, Sharon.
Quite a few years ago, I was talking to Harley Echo, and we'll get into that. Is this on?
Yeah, just get right on it.
Harley Echo is my age, and he's Dale Breivac's cousin, and he's the guy that wrote this whole story. But anyway, somehow he let me know that he had just got through writing this little story about growing up in the neighborhood, back on the top of Engoe Road and the Endosican Road. And I said, gee, I'd really like to read that story. And I did, and I thought it was interesting. And in fact, I read it a couple of times, and it brought back some old memories. And I thought, you know, this has some down-home interest, and maybe Jan Lee would be interested in reading this story. So that's how it came into Jan Lee's hand. But anyway, up home. Engoe Road and Endosican Road, and we're up where Dale and Donna live now in the corner. And
We can't hear.
my father's cousins, well, my grandmother's sister, married Charlie Eckholm. That doesn't make any difference to anybody, but I'm just trying to get you oriented here. And
Grandmother's sister.
grandmother's sister Clara married Charlie Eckholm. Charlie had a little bar on the corner, which is right across from where the top side is now. Or the bar is not there anymore because in probably the late 40s, it got moved down to its present location where it sits on Highway 13 next to Billy Vino's place. That was Charlie Eckholm's bar. So anyway, just to get you physically orientated where all this stuff took place, and I think hope you're going to enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.
Charlie Eckholm begins his Up Home on Engoe Road stories with a quote by Robert Fulghum. It's just this, that there are places we all come from, deep, rooty commonplaces, that make us who we are, and we disdain them or treat them lightly at our peril. There is a sense in which we need to go home again, and can go home again, not to recover home, no, but to sanctify memory. Born during the Depression, I was the youngest of 6 children and the only boy. I grew up in the Swedish community of small farms in northern Wisconsin. Our 40-acre farm was not the major source of income for our family. My father worked full-time as a steam fitter for the local DuPont company just down the road. My mother did most of the daily farm chores, milking the 4 cows, feeding the dozen chickens, slopping the 2 pigs, tending the garden, pumping the water, washing and mending and sewing clothes, scrubbing the hardwood floors, chopping the wood for the cook stove, baking the bread, and taking care of my elderly grandparents. Thank God she was a strong woman. More than a geographical location, Up Home was the climactic economic and social environment that formed my foundation. More specifically, Up Home was what we kids called my aunt and uncle's farm, and the setting and origin of my childhood memories and stories. Up Home, the farm, was actually 1/2 mile up Engoe Road from our farm. It was a group of old buildings on a hillside overlooking Chequamegon Bay, and the town of Ashland some 10 miles away. And like our farm, was incapable of supporting my aunt and uncle and their 11 children, my cousins. Unlike the picturesque farms downstate with their neatly painted barns and houses situated in the center of contoured fields of lush crops and pastures with herds of fat cattle, the farms Up Home were small, irregular plots carved out of the poplar and pine woods, with weather-beaten buildings surrounded by fields of weeds and wildflowers. The yards, scattered with rusty farm machinery and old car bodies, left where they were last used or just wore out, with last year's grass sticking up through them, were looked on with disdain by passing tourists on their way to their summer homes on the lake. By most standards, this was a poverty area, having declined from the boom days at the turn of the century when lumber, copper, and iron ore were abundant. To us kids, Nordic offspring of our immigrant parents who were attracted to this north woods to work those lumber camps and mines, this was a great place to grow up. We didn't feel ashamed of our homes. We never thought of ourselves as poor. But the people of the community thought that. It was never apparent to us kids. Not being able to afford something didn't mean being poor. We just didn't have the money, like everybody else. If there wasn't money to buy it, someone made it. And there was real value in those old rusty eyesores resting in the tall grass. All or part of them would be used by somebody someday. On any sunny summer's day, the yard up home was a virtual potpourri of new and old grass, wild flowers, and pine resin scents mingled with the vapors of old motor oil. A common pastime for us kids was rolling old tires down the long dirt driveway. My favorite was a treadless Ward's Deluxe, discarded by my father after several unsuccessful attempts to repair it. I rolled that tire from our place the half-mile up Engoe Road and deposited up home with the old tires of my cousins. We kids all had our favorites. Cheering our tires on, we watched them roll unguided down the driveway, picking up speed, bouncing over ruts, careening off each other, leaping the ditch, and finally coming to rest in the tall Timothy grass, only to be retrieved again another day. Rolling tires was an art, a noisy, dirty one. Vehicles in our minds, our tires would spring into action. Not sleek, shiny race cars, no. Our tires became huge, multi-geared, mufflerless pulp trucks. My cousin Snooze made the best truck noises. The smallest of us, not much taller than the tires themselves. His sound effects were those of a clay-spattered pump truck in the muddy ruts of a logging trail. Snooze was a mess, like his imaginary truck. Bib overalls smeared with spit and red clay, a threadbare patch over one knee, and frayed cuffs caked with mud that hid his bare feet. This was Snooze. Except for the spit, of course, this was probably an apt description of all of us kids. The six of us consisted of Cha, Boofy, Sonny, Snooze, Dodie, not related, and me. Snooze was the youngest, 4 years older than his nephews, Sonny and Boofy, who were the same age as me. Cha was 1 year older, and Dodie was the oldest and the toughest. Duck on the Rock was a favorite game of ours. Don't know where the game and its rules came from, probably brought over from the old country. It required only those things that could be found in the yard. In our case, rocks. One big boulder the size of your head, and smaller hand-sized rocks. The ducks, one for each of us kids. The complex, ever-changing rules of the game came down to knocking the smaller rocks off the big one. Truly a character-building game that provided challenge, excitement, and bruised shins. Rocks were plentiful. Between us 6 kids, we moved mountains of egg-sized rocks around the countryside. Sonny was by far the best rock thrower. He could whip a handful of rocks in rapid-fire fashion with amazing accuracy. One rare hot day, wearing only our bib overalls, Sonny and I were throwing rocks as we walked barefoot on the dirt road. Dodie and his older brother Tom were coming down the road, riding Silver and Scout home from cutting hay at a neighbor's field. Oblivious to Sonny and I, the horses plodded on by. Man and beast were hot and tired, heads down and swaying from side to side. Without a second thought of the consequences, Sonny wheeled around and whipped his arm. With the sound of a smacking hiss, the rock embedded itself into Scout's bowel. The impact shot adrenaline into the horse, overriding his fatigue, and its hind quarters bulged as he bolted into a full gallop. Sonny, what'd you do that for, you crazy Whoa! Doty managed to stay astride on Scout, but by the time he was able to get back under control, both horses were too far down the road to make it worthwhile coming back after us. Sonny and I laughed as hard we could barely hear Doty's cursing and promising to get even. Boofy was the smartest of our group. With straw hair, blue eyes, and freckles, like the rest of us, Boofy always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. Well, except for the day we took the Model T up the hill. Amongst the vehicles in the yard up home was an old Model T. No engine, no top, no windshield, no seat, no tires, just rims, and a steering column that at one time had a steering wheel attached to it. It was nothing more than a frame with a wooden beer case perched behind the steering column. It was a great toy. On this day, we pushed our toy down the driveway about 100 yards to Engoe Road, with Boofy seated on the wooden beer case and making his pulp truck muffler sound. The trip down the driveway was easy. The push up on Engoe Road was not. Boofy hollered encouragement and steered close to the ditch just in case a car came over the hill. At the top of the hill, we negotiated a multi-point turn, back and forth until the Model T was pointed back down the hill. Poised in the center of the road, we could see miles in either direction. We checked for cars one last time before shoving off. Surprised by the ease with which the Model T moved on the steep slope surface of the road, we pushers quickly got left behind. Unable to climb aboard, we were lucky to get out of the way without getting our bare feet run over. Boofy, clinging to the steering wheel spokes, clattered faster and faster down the hill, picking up more speed with every bounce. Singing from one side of the road to the other, sparks flying from the bare wheel rims, it became clear that Boofy had lost control. With one final zig, the front wheels jackknifed, hurling Boofy, the wood beer case, and the Model T into the ditch. Holy cripes! Holy cripes! We ran to Boofy's aid. Fortunately, he landed on a soft shoulder of the road, stopping short of the ditch. He had ripped another hole in his overalls and was a little scratched up, but was okay. Sitting on the side of the road, we stared at the Model T's front end buried in the clay bank of the ditch. Holy cruckers. We hoisted Boofy on our shoulders and headed off down the hill, leaving the Model T hopelessly stuck in the ditch to become the object of some tourist's disdainful gazes. Now, Doty was a hot shot. Head up, chest out, shoulders back, spring in his step, spark in his eye, swagger, bragger, charmer, ladies' man, full of life and himself. When Doty showed up, the rules changed. Stakes got bigger. The jumping bar was higher, the running distances longer, and the lap time shorter. If you avoid being tripped by Doty, shoved by Doty, or for whatever reason you managed to cross the finish line ahead of Doty, you could be sure there would be an immediate rematch. There being nobody in the immediate area of Doty's age, he played with us. Naturally, Doty's presence added an element of excitement and adventure. His 2 years age advantage gave us less sophisticated kids knowledge beyond our years. Dodie, swearing, demanded attention, eagerly sharing accounts of his latest exploits and conquests. He was never at a loss for words. Dodie widened our vocabularies and introduced us to God's little acre, sharing the important words and paragraphs underlined on the handful of earmarked pages he carried around in his back pocket. Dodie was just different from the rest of us. For one thing, he was circumcised. He never made any big thing about it. I mean, we didn't check each other out other than the casual glance when we stopped to pee.
I gotta take a pee!
Said by anybody would cause us all to stop and do it together. We'd line up along the ditch or on the road or along a building or just stand around in a circle. We couldn't help but see. But nobody, including Dodie, ever commented. I thought it had something to do with his being Catholic. I mean, all the rest of us were Lutheran, of course. Dodie went to church more often than us, but it didn't make him any better than us. Catholics just went to church more than Lutherans in general. Everybody knew that. Now for Snooze. Snooze's nickname was Swedish for snuff. His given name was Ronald. He always ran around spitting, which would have been appropriate in itself, but because of the unique weaning applied to him by Pa, Snooze being the last of 11 and born when Ma was in her 50s, Ronald was given special treatment. He was nursing into his 4th year, testing Ma's patience for sure. So the story goes, Pa decided it was time to break Ronald of his nursing habit. And since other measures had proven unsuccessful, Pa took the drastic step of rubbing Snooze on Ma's nipples. But did that stop him? Nope. He just sucked and spit until he had rid the area of Snooze, and thus his nickname. Well, anyway, it was a cool, gray, rainy day, and Ma was tired of having us kids underfoot in the house. Ma being my aunt and Snooze's and Cha's mother, but she was just Ma to all of us. Ma says,
Why don't you kids go play in the hay barn?
so we put on our muddy buckle overshoes because the driveway was completely saturated, and jumping off the porch, we went running, jumping, buckles jingling as we zigzagged with our jackets flowing over our heads. Damp odors greet us as we enter the dark interior of the small cow barn, made even darker this day by the low overcast skies. I waited at the door for Snooze, who could never keep up, as the rest of us kids scurried up to the hayloft. The big door at the upper end of the barn was where the hay entered the barn. The gaping opening provided fresh air the year round, and the hay that was dumped on the upper level would overflow to the lower level as the loft filled up, making a huge amount of hay on the lower level. Pockets were created by the hay next to the walls, and we kids had enlarged those pockets into tunnels that ran the length of the cow barn stalls. Now, from inside the barn, Snooze and I could hear Dodie directing traffic in the tunnel. There were knotholes in the boards of the cow stalls, which lined up with the tunnel. Snooze, always devilish, picked up some stiff straws and began poking them through the knotholes into where Dodie's bossy voice was coming from. Of course, Dodie was not one to poke anything at. He was bigger than the rest of us, and he was a bit of a bully and a mama's boy. It was always, our Dodie this, and our Dodie that. We just love our Dodie. It made us sick. Anyway, Snooze just kept poking away.
Hey, cut it out!
And because Snooze couldn't hide his squeaky laugh, Dodie knew exactly who it was doing the poking.
Okay, Snooze, cut it out.
Well, that was all Snooze needed to hear. Finding more straws and squeaking all the while, Snooze looked around for another straw and spotted a sturdy twig lying alongside a fresh cow pie. Well, the next move obvious, Snooze stirred the twig in the green cow pie, coating the end a good 6 inches. Then squeaking with glee, he shoved the lathered end into the knothole. And like a hungry fish striking the bait, Dodie grabbed the end of the twig, and suddenly realizing what he'd gotten hold of,
Oh, shit! Snooze!
there was a great commotion on the other side of the cow stall as I pushed Snooze out the door, yelling, "Run!" Snooze took off for the house, running as fast as his little legs could carry him. Dodie burst out of the tunnels, cow pie on his hands and jacket and fire in his eyes. Scrambling to his feet, he charged through the open door, taking off after Snooze. The rest of us gathered at the barn doorway, cheering Snooze on. "Run, Snooze, run!" Dodie was closing the gap fast. Oh, it looked bad for Snooze. But just as Dodie was ahead and just about to grab Snooze in the driveway, the buckles on Dodie's left overshoe locked with the buckles of his right overshoe. With his ankles shackled, Dodie's face down collapsed into the muddy driveway was spectacular. Muddy water spattered Snooze as he scampered to the farthest corner of the porch.
Holy cripes!
Said Snooze as he quickly exited into the house. We made sure to watch from a safe distance as Dodie struggled to a sitting position and unbuckled his overshoes. It was only once he was well down the driveway on his way home that we all did a little dance and howled with laughter. And of course, we all knew where Snooze had gone, straight to the comfort of Ma's bosom. Said Ma, as we 6 energetic preteen boys invaded her kitchen. We'd all come into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and if we were lucky, maybe a piece of fresh baked bread. Ma, who in typical Scandinavian tradition was having her 10 a.m. coffee, was not exactly thrilled to see us. I mean, she had just finished baking a whole countertop full of bread, and had only just now sat down for the first time all morning. The kitchen up home was a large open room, equipped with all the essentials needed to feed a family of 11 kids. a huge wooden table covered in oilcloth, an ever-present pitcher of cream, bowls of sugar and butter, and a loaf of homemade bread. And the wood-fired cook stove had an ever-present pot of coffee sitting in the center of its ever-hot cooking surface. There was a doorway leading to the pantry that had a printed flour sack attached to nails on either side of the doorless frame. Next to the outside door, there was an 80-pound milk can that held the entire water supply for the house. Water was pumped daily and then hauled to the house in that milk can. Dipping for water from the milk can was a ritual learned from careful observation. We learned early on how much water to dip for, because all that was dipped had to be drunk. There was no drain to put leftover water into. So we kids would take several deep breaths between gulps, eyes bulging over the dipper that was held by dirty little hands, and then put the dipper back on the wall. One day, I had forgotten to hang the dipper back on the wall in the proper position. The dipper was never washed, so apparently, for hygienic reasons, the opening of the dipper was to always face the wall. Even though uncles and older cousins coming in from working on the sawmill would reach right into the can for a drink, and kids, myself included, would often reach down into the can with grubby hands while holding the gray and white enamel dipper. But for hygienic reasons, the dipper always had to be hung back on its nail with the cup facing the wall. "Oh, oh!" yelled Mom. I should have known better. I bolted for the door, but it was too late. I felt the stinging rap of knuckles on the back of my head. I didn't bother to look around to see who had got me. It didn't matter. I had forgotten to hang the dipper back up on the wall. Anyone could yell, "Oh, oh!" and the hand to the back of the head didn't have to belong to the person doing the yelling. The ow-ow backhand was executed with a long-reaching wrist action that would make a professional tennis player jealous. So Ma could yell, "Oh, oh!" at you from across the room, and the person closest to you would whip his or her hand across the back of your head. The effect of this swift form of justice was obvious. Not obviously good or obviously bad, but obvious. With 11 kids in the immediate family, plus a bunch of related kids hanging around all the time, this direct approach to law and order worked quite well. So, that day, and the accompanying pop on the back of my head was expected as I escaped out the back door to the back porch. Now, the back porch was the main entrance to the house because the front porch had never been completed. Of course, neither had the back porch, for that matter, but it was functional. The screen door showed the stress of heavy use and had all the elements of a classic wooden screen door, especially the resonating slap at each coming and going of us kids, inevitably followed by Ma's voice, "Don't slam the door!" Oh. The personality of the screen door changed with the seasons. There was the twang and slap of summer and fall when the door was at its best. Then the sobering clatter of cold stone door glass in the winter. And in the spring, the muffled sound of drizzle-swelled wood, often resulting in the door left ajar. Drizzly days far outnumbered the sunny days of spring in northern Wisconsin. The first signs of growth were the hardy rhubarb shoots that emerged alongside the last traces of snow. This signaled the beginnings of garden preparations. My mother was always anxious to get the garden plot ready for planting. She had to start working on my father early, and her poking around in the rhubarb was a sure sign to my father that that time was not far off. Getting the garden plot ready meant getting the tractor ready. The tractor, like many of the other implements around our farm, was the result of my father's ingenuity. A 1928 Chevrolet four-cylinder overhead valve engine was coupled to a pair of very large steel drive wheels with spikes. The front wheels were filled with concrete ballast to keep the front end on the ground during hard pulls. The seat was set for my father's comfort, so I had to stand up when I started driving the little tractor. The first startup of spring was always exciting. left exactly where it had stopped the previous year, and with only a tin can over the vertical exhaust pipe to keep out the snow and rain, starting it up was a rebirth, like spring itself. However, starting the little tractor was not something to be attempted until properly instructed. And proper instructed meant watching my father very closely. That was the way it was with everything I learned from my father.
Okay, now you try it.
I checked the ignition switch, off. Stepped around to the front of the tractor and reached down for the crank handle, making sure my thumb was on the same side of the handle as my palm. I had heard many times about Mr. Chapman breaking his wrist because he had his thumb wrapped around the crank handle. I could feel my father watching me as I pulled on the handle and turned the engine over slowly. Well, it's easier than I expected. So I turned the ignition switch on, repositioned myself in front of the tractor. This time was for real. I braced myself for a good pull on the crank just to get a little better bite, and wham! I saw stars as something jerked my arm straight down, slamming my chin into the radiator.
You forgot to retard the spark. It kicked back down you.
I had left the lever on the steering column in the upright position. I would never make that mistake again. Except for a little water in the gas line, which always caused my father to swear.
Helvete!
The little Chevy 4 was spewing its rhythmic, unmuffled explosions into the spring air before mid-morning coffee. Of course, the next big test would be to see if the little tractor could pull itself free from its winter imprisonment. Well, like the little engine that could, it broke free from the red clay ruts and flexed its rusty joints. It never failed. A single bottom plow was adequate for the small job at hand. And by noon, we were ready for the next phase of garden preparation, spreading manure. If rubber boots ever had a purpose in this life, this had to be it. There was no way to spread manure standing around the edges of the pile with a pitchfork. You had to get right up in it. For those of us who grew up around it, manure was a natural and valuable commodity. You might say we lived and breathed it, especially in the spring with every farmer spreading it. There is no way of staying upwind. After the manure came the disc harrow, dragged in crisscross patterns, mixing and loosening the soil. Once completed, the plot was now ready for the planter and the keeper of the garden, my mother. There were straight as arrow rows of potatoes,
Corn,
cabbage,
beets,
carrots,
peas,
beans,
parsley,
lettuce,
tomatoes,
cucumbers,
dill,
and rutabagas. And there were radishes, set onions for my father, and a half row of nasturtiums and cosmos for my mother. Stooping.
oh, forever stooping,
Stooping to plant.
stooping to hold,
Stooping to weed.
stooping to pick.
The summer garden could put a kink in almost anyone's back. But the rewards were long-lasting and provided many meals through the fall and winter. Our basement shelves held quarts of canned vegetables,
Apples,
berries,
sacks of potatoes,
and rutabagas, all stored in the darkest corners, under the stairs,
go get some potatoes for supper.
was a very scary request. There were mice down there, and the potatoes that remained in the spring were dragged out into the sunlight and cut into sections and returned to the garden for the next crop. Now, berries were something else. Berries took a lot of care. Raspberries, strawberries, gooseberries required more time than my mother had, so the berry patch was often submitted to overwhelming weeds. But there were always wild berries. Wild beats tame everything. What is it that makes the wild berries taste so superior to their cultivated cousins? Blueberry picking was a big deal. Blueberry picking meant a whole day's outing, complete with picnic lunch, Kool-Aid, and stopping at Long Lake for a swim on the way home, if we were good and picked a lot for growing jack pines and little else, except blueberries. Cars loaded with aunts and uncles and sisters and brothers and cousins embarked early in the morning of the scheduled day. Clouds of dust engulfed the trailing cars as we rolled down miles and miles of unmarked fire lanes, providing access to unmarked landmarks such as Cozy Corner, Spring Road, Buffalo Humps, and then Old Battle Axe Railroad grade. Pails and saucepans were handed out, but our mothers always started us kids out with a little tin cup. To think of picking enough berries to fill a milk pail was beyond the limits of any child's imagination. We then scattered out among the bushes, oohing and wowing at the first sight of the plump, blue-black-skinned berries. Plink, plunk, plink, plink, plunk, 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 pa-dunk, plink, plunk, pa-dunk. The sounds of berries hitting the bottoms of containers came from all directions, and as the morning wore on, our enthusiasm for the sport began to wear off. Hey, stop eating the berries!
I'm not eating the berries!
Yes, you are!
No, I'm not!
Oh yeah, let me see your tongue! Snooze had definitely been eating berries. There was no way to hide a blueberry-stained tongue. Ma, Snooze is eating berries!
Okay, you kids, stop your scrapping. We're going to have lunch in a little while.
That was good for maybe a 15-minute respite. Well, Pickering changed to talk of Kool-Aid and how much we would drink in one gulp. But then suddenly, splat!
Ma, Sonny's throwing berries!
Sonny stood up from behind a clump of bushes with an innocent look, denying the deed. Well, whoever threw was a great shot. Purple juice ran down Boof's neck, and before the day was through, there were purple stains all over everybody. Back up home, I would stare in amazement at the 12-quart milk pails, brimming over with berries, and dream about tomorrow's pie and the sauce we would have on our pancakes the coming winter. So, of course, fresh, wild blueberry pie with a big glass of milk remains to this day one of my favorite memories of good things to eat. It's one of those perfect summer nights in northern Wisconsin. One of those twilight evenings that everybody remembers and longs for during the short days of winter. I'm walking the half mile up home to see Chad. It's Friday night and my mother and father have gone into town as usual. It's the summer of 1950 and I'm between high school and something. Who knows? Maybe I'll be in Korea by next year. As I walked, I was aware even then that there was something special about walking on a dirt road. Unlike unnatural concrete surfaces, dirt roads have character, are ever-changing, dependent on weather conditions, and how long it's been since the grader came by. This day the road is dust dry, and there are an abundance of egg-sized stones at my feet. Picking up a handful, I whip them side on at a telephone pole. They all missed the target. Shit, I'm losing it already, I think, as I remember younger days that had left scars on that gray, weathered pole. Now at 18, the only thing I'm sure of is that my small world is about to expand out of control. I'm not sure of where I'm going or what I'm going to do. Can't even hit a telephone pole anymore. Shit. As I get closer, I see Chad sitting on the porch in his Monkey Ward's green work pants and matching shirt with the sleeves rolled up and his ever-present striped railroad cap.
How are you, Craig?
Chad extended his sunburned arm, offering me a Camel cigarette, then immediately pulling back says,
Oh, yeah, you don't smoke, do you? Gotta keep in shape for the coach.
I had been the captain of the basketball team my senior year, And I know he was envious that Sonny, Goofy, and I had stayed with school and got to participate in those extracurricular activities that play such an important role in small country communities. One had to quit, or Chad had to quit school at 16. But we all stayed together as much as we could, including Chad and most of our plans. I asked Chad if he'd ever heard anything from our friend at the draft board this week.
Well, Emma says maybe another 6 months before our names come up on the draft list. Maybe after Christmas, you know, we ought to start thinking about signing up for the Navy. What do you think?
I think we ought to go down to Lenny's and get drunk and be somebody.
Well, yeah, sure. In whose car?
Ask Pa when they come back from town.
Oh, sure. And $100 while you're at it.
Hell, you never did anything to any one of his cars.
Yeah, but Sonny's done enough to have all of them wrecking his cars for all of us.
Hey, how's Goofy doing?
Oh, he signed up at the County Normal for summer school. He's going to get a teaching certificate. Says it'll keep him out of the draft.
Goofy's smart enough, all right, but keep him out of the draft?
Yeah.
Huh. We sat silent, looking over the fields and woods. We could hear the car coming up the road long before we ever saw it. In unison, we turned towards each other with expressions of disbelief. That's what we saw, emerging from the cloud of dust rolling over the treetops. A shiny blue Model A with clean white wall tires began slowing for the driveway. Without saying a word, Chad and I bolted from the sofa. The car slid to a stop, and Goofy proudly stepped out onto the running board with a grin from ear to ear.
Whoa, what the hell have you got here, Goofy?
Yeah, what's the story? I asked. Well, it turns out Goofy'd been working on it for 2 weeks in some guy's garage. Well, Chad and I could hardly believe what we were looking at. There were quite a few Model A's running around the countryside, but this one was really something special. Wow! Okay, let's see it run.
Yeah, let's take it for a spin down to Lenny's for a brew.
Goofy tried to beg off, saying he had to work early in the morning.
Oh, come on, Goofy. We haven't gone anywhere together in almost a month. What do you say?
Goofy reluctantly agreed, and we headed down the road to Lenny's. All the way there, Goofy kept insisting that we promise to leave after 2 beers. Goofy persisted, trying to get commitments from us as we distracted him with heaps of praise for his car. Oh, what a great car! Sure is a beauty. We parked on the grass at the end of the row of dusty pickup trucks and mud-spattered cars. Chad and I quickly slid off the passenger side and waited for Goofy, who had his hands thrust in his pockets and his head down. Oh, come on, Goofy, relax. It's going to be fun. Lenny's was a one-room building with a brass neon sign hanging over the door. Not a typical place for teenagers. We weren't going out this night to meet the teen crowd. Oh, no. We were going out this night to drink beer at Lenny's. Lenny's was the place to escape real life, heavy decisions. A dozen or more people, mostly guys, wearing work clothes and caps with John Deere or Midland Co-op, International Harvester, or Ruffer's Garage, acknowledged our entry. And the jukebox, as usual, was pumping out a Frank Yankovic polka. Lenny met us at the end of the bar with 3 bottles of blast. Chad wouldn't drink any other kind of beer. Lenny was a short, wiry man of 60-odd years who told us the latest jokes involving Finns and Polacks, and the night was underway. We were well over the 2-beer quota with only a half hour gone. Goofy was getting fidgety, going to the door frequently to check on his car. Then he turned and announced to everyone, "I'm leaving!" Of course, we all knew he would never leave Chad, and Chad knew it too. So the night went on. Beer and stories and beers and polkas, stories, and polkas. Until finally, Lenny walked us to the door, closing and locking it behind us. We tried to cheer Boofy up as we turned the corner and started up the hill toward up home. Boofy was still clearly annoyed, and when Chad suddenly said,
Hey, stop the car. I gotta pee.
Boofy told him he wasn't going to stop the car, and if he had to pee, he would have to do it standing up on the running board. So, without hesitation, Chad opened the door, stepped out on the running board with a camel hanging from his mouth, and proceeded to piss towards the rear of the car. All was going smoothly until Boofy suddenly hit the brakes. Chad flew right off the running board and past the front of the car. Holy crap, Boofy, what the hell are you doing? I said, as Chad took giant steps down the side of the road, down the ditch, and into the darkness, out of the range of the headlights.
Oh, Chad's gonna kill me.
Yeah, if he isn't already dead.
Oh, shit, you think he's hurt?
Well, we better find out. Boofy turned the car around and headed back to the spot where Chad flew off.
Oh, Chad's gonna kill me. He's gonna kill me.
I leaned forward, scanning the ditch, hoping to see Chad. Then, like in a ghost story, the headlights picked up this figure. It was Chad, standing at the edge of the ditch, his ever-present railroad cap gone and his white forehead gleaming above the wild expression on his face. The front of his monkey ward pants and shirt wet with, you know. Chad had a big boulder in each hand. Boofy hollered at him to put the rocks down, and I couldn't help it. I just started laughing, partly from the sight of Chad standing there literally pissed off, and partly from relief that he was alive.
Hey, this isn't funny.
And Boofy said, I know, let's go get him. So Boofy slowly drove towards Chad. But as we got close, we could tell he was getting himself ready to heave the rocks. Boofy gunned the car. Well, as fast as a Model A could be gunned. Veering away from Chad. Chad came up from his squatting position and put in the boulders at the car as we passed. They hit their mark, and the car rocked from the double impact. Our first thought, of course, was the paint job. I had stopped laughing, and Boofy and I, realizing the seriousness of the situation, started planning our attack. We turned around at the next driveway, and I got out on the running board. We approached Chad from the other direction, stopping about 100 feet away, and tried to talk him into putting the rocks down. Chad's stance was the same. 2 big boulders, one in each hand, still no railroad cap, but this time he was giggling. A good sign, we thought. Boofy rolled ahead as before, but this time I jumped off the running board onto Chad. Blinded by the headlights, it was too late for him to react, and I tackled him. Boofy was out of the car and on top of him as well before Chad could respond, and by the time we wrestled him into the car, we were all laughing. We spent the remainder of the trip home, recounting the event, each of us giving our views and laughing equally as hard at each version. We didn't talk about the condition of the car, except to agree that we would all work on the damage together the next evening. So the next night, Boofy got off work. The 3 of us did indeed work on the car, up home, under the apple tree. The Model A's skin was tough. We smoothed out the dents in no time. Standing back, admiring our job, Boofy said,
Not bad. Nobody will ever notice.
Scrubbing our hands at the water pump, Chad winked at me and said,
What do you say we go down to Lenny's for a couple of beers?
But Boofy was already heading for the car, laughing.
Not tonight, guys. I got a date.
Chad and I laughed as we headed for the porch, waving to Boofy. Sitting back on the old porch sofa, Chad searched his pocket for a camel.
Hey, I gotta head over to Monkey Ward's and get a new cap. You think I could get the car from your old man?
We laughed a bit and sat there watching Boofy drive off. We just sat on the porch and watched the sunset like we'd done our entire lives, like we'd done 1,000 times up home on Engoe Road.